David has gone to war many times as a soldier in King Saul's army and as king over the army of Israel himself. And with God's help, he has amassed many victories over his enemies. God even said to David, I have been with you wherever you have gone and have cut off all your enemies from before you. But never has David faced an enemy who was his flesh and blood. Never has he led a battle against his own son. That's what will happen here as David and his men face Absalom and Israel. Let's see what happens. I'm in 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1, reading from the New American Standard Version. Then David numbered the people who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. We know that Absalom has the army of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, but David has a sizable army himself. This isn't like when he was on the run from King Saul with a ragtag group of 600 men. David's got thousands ready to fight for him. David sent the people out, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I myself will surely go out with you also. But the people said, you should not go out, for if we indeed flee, they will not care about us. Even if half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that you be ready to help us from the city. Then the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and thousands. The king charged Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king charged all the commanders concerning Absalom. It was noble of David to want to go out with his army and lead them into battle, but it didn't make sense. He's the reason Absalom and his army have come out. They want him dead. Better for him to stay behind. So he stands by the gate and sees them off, and he has a charge for the commanders. You might think he'd say something like, be strong and show yourself courageous. May the Lord do what is good in his sight, which is similar to what Joab said prior to a battle. But David doesn't give such words of exhortation. His charge is, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. Absalom is there to kill his father. David wants victory, but he wants his son spared. Continuing verse 6, then the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. The people of Israel were defeated there before the servants of David, and the slaughter there that day was great, 20,000 men. For the battle there was spread over the whole countryside, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. Whoa! Israel came out to fight on the territory of David and his men in the wilderness, and they were slaughtered. Once again, God is helping David. His creation, the forest, is devouring more than the sword. Continuing verse 9. Now Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. For Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak. So he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him kept going. When a certain man saw it, he told Joab and said, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Then Joab said to the man who had told him, now behold, you saw him. Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? And I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. The man said to Joab, Even if I should receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not put out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, protect for me the young man Absalom. Otherwise, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. So now we see an example of how the forest is devouring. Absalom's head gets caught in the branches of an oak. Remember, we were told about his thick mane of hair. Maybe it was his hair that got him caught. In any event, he is literally hanging from the tree, and Commander Joab chastises this man for not killing him on the spot. The man says, right, and if I would have killed the king's son and the king called me to account, all you would have done is stand there. Everybody heard what David said about protecting Absalom. This man says, I'm not touching him. But he did tell Joab. What will Joab do? Continuing verse 14. Then Joab said, I will not waste time here with you. So he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men who carried Joab's armor gathered around and struck Absalom and killed him. This is a battle. Absalom was trying to overthrow the king and kill him. It's no surprise that the king's commander, if given the chance, would take him out. Except David had said to deal gently with him. Joab clearly did not follow the king's orders. Joab did follow David's orders when David said to put Uriah in the front line of battle, which led to Uriah's death. And interestingly, Joab was the one who got David to bring Absalom back from exile. But Absalom's treachery was apparently too much for Joab, and probably did not help that Absalom set Joab's field on fire. Joab puts 3 spears through Absalom's heart. Surely enough to kill him, but his armor bearers follow up and make sure he's dead. Continuing verse 16. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained the people. They took Absalom and cast him into a deep pit in the forest, and erected over him a very great heap of stones. And heaping stones over a body in this manner showed how much the person was detested. And all Israel fled, each to his tent. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself a pillar which is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to preserve my name. So he named the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. 2 Samuel 14:27 says Absalom had 3 sons. So it could be that this monument was set up before he had sons, or it could be that they had died. Continuing verse 19, then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, please let me run and bring the king news that the Lord has freed him from the hand of his enemies. But Joab said to him, you are not the man to carry news this day, but you shall carry news another day. However, you shall carry no news today, because the king's son is dead. Then Joab said to the Cushite, go, tell the king what you have seen. So the Cushite bowed to Joab and ran. Now Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said once more to Joab, but whatever happens, please let me also run after the Cushite. And Joab said, why would you run, my son, since you will have no reward for going? But whatever happens, he said, I will run. So he said to him, run. Then Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain and passed up the Cushite. So 2 people are now on their way to give David news of the battle. David has no idea whether his throne is still in jeopardy or maybe even his life. Continuing verse 24, Now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof of the gate by the wall, and raised his eyes and looked, and behold, a man running by himself. The watchman called and told the king, and the king said, "If he is by himself, there is good news in his mouth." And he came nearer and nearer. Then the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called to the gatekeeper and said, "Behold, another man running by himself." And the king said, "This one also is bringing good news." The watchman said, "I think the running of the first one is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok." And the king said, "This is a good man and comes with good news." Notice much is being made of the news. Who would bring it? Now the watchman is looking out and reporting to David. 3 times David mentions good news. That's what he's hoping for. And based on these reports, that's what he's thinking he'll get. The question is, what does he consider good news? Continuing verse 28, Ahimaaz called and said to the king, "All is well." And he prostrated himself before the king with his face to the ground. And he said, "Blessed is the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who lifted their hands against my lord the king." The king said, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" And Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant and your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I did not know what it was." Then the king said, "Turn aside and stand here." So he turned aside and stood still. So David got good news. He was told that the Lord delivered up the men who had come against him. David's throne is safe. But David doesn't rejoice. He doesn't praise God. All he wants to know is whether Absalom is okay. Ahimaaz doesn't share that news, so David waits still. Continuing verse 31, behold, the Cushite arrived, and the Cushite said, "Let my lord the king receive good news. For the Lord has freed you this day from the hand of all those who rose up against you." Then the king said to the Cushite, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" And the Cushite answered, "Let the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be as that young man." The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And thus he said as he walked, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." We can't help but feel for David. This is his son. He loved Absalom. I don't know what David thought a proper outcome might be, but he certainly did not want him killed. Yet Absalom was wicked. The Lord had ordained to bring calamity upon him. And what God ordains cannot be stopped. So King David receives this good news that his enemies were defeated, yet he is in deep mourning. I'm reminded again that God said the sword would never depart from his house. Son rose up against father. For David, there couldn't be a happy ending. Either David would be killed or his son. But God gave David a stunning victory. He had the forest fighting for David. Both of the runners acknowledged God when they shared the news. One said, "Blessed is the Lord your God who has delivered up the men." The other said, "The Lord has freed you this day." But David couldn't see the Lord's hand or thank him because of his grief. I wonder how often we do that. I wonder how often God answers our prayers, blesses us in some way, even delivers us, but we don't see it because things didn't quite turn out the way we wanted. We can't see God because we're too wrapped up in ourselves. Every day God blesses us. Every day there's a reason to give him thanks and praise. 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18. Rejoice always. Pray without ceasing. In everything give thanks. For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Clinging to God is staying mindful of Him, praying to Him, as David did when he said, make Ahithophel's counsel foolishness, and then thanking Him and rejoicing in Him. Let us not miss even the everyday small things God does in our lives. Let's look for them and cling by giving thanks.